Okay, so since I made a video on the beta, I thought I'd squeeze a quick update into my busy schedule on how I'm feeling about Black Ops 6 now that it's out. I have a lot to say about it, but I'm going to try to make it short. I'm going to go from campaign to multiplayer to zombies, but to sum up my opinion so far, it's like a slightly better version of Black Ops Cold War. For the most part, it takes everything about Cold War and makes it a little bit better, but I will say the honeymoon phase is wearing off, however, and I'm getting the impression that it's kind of a middle-of-the-road Call of Duty entry overall. So I've yet to finish the campaign. Again, I have a busy schedule, and I made the decision to play through it on veteran, which has actually been a pretty good decision so far. It's decently difficult without feeling unfair, but it is obviously going to take more time, hence why I haven't finished it. In some Call of Duty's veteran is just unfun, but that's not the case here. I think it works decently well. The campaign has already had a lot to offer. There's been a lot of variety from classic Call of Duty levels with, gunfights, stealth, quick time events, and shooting from a moving vehicle sequences. Then there's some newer things like social stealth, which they did have in Cold War, and all sorts of optional secrets and puzzles and side missions, and even a mission that's basically a small Far Cry game in one mission, which is pretty cool. And I'm glad that they didn't stick with it for longer than one mission, because it's also something that could get old really fast if it's not fleshed out. And I think they hit like the perfect size with it. Unlike Cold War, the mission order has been completely linear, which I guess is a small advantage that Cold War has, because I do think that's an interesting thing that Cold War did, was allowing for some non-linear mission order. Like you could do certain missions before or after other missions, and that's not the case here, but that's not really a big deal. So without spoilers, the story has been pretty interesting. In between missions you get times to like talk to the different characters, and while the like dialogue options are pretty limited, you do get to know more about them, which makes them more memorable. Like I for sure like have all of these characters memorized, whereas in some of the other Call of Duty games, a lot of the characters end up being completely forgettable. My main complaint with the story writing so far is that sometimes it gets a little cheesy with like one-liners, and what I can only explain is facial expressions that someone who watches too many movies would think is cool, and only that person would think it's cool. Like it's stuff that people don't actually do in real life. I don't really know how else to explain it. But the campaign has been surprisingly good overall. At this rate, I'd say it even has a chance to be the best Call of Duty campaign since Black Ops 2, maybe even Black Ops 1. Granted, it doesn't fizzle out like Modern Warfare 2019's campaign did. I feel like the second half of that campaign was just not nearly as good as the first half.
Team deathmatch. Destroy the enemy.
So the multiplayer is pretty much exactly what I expected from the beta, both good and bad. I'd say it's decent overall, but I have quite a few complaints. The first is the maps. Half of them in the regular playlist are about the same size or even smaller than Nuketown. That gets annoying fast, and I can safely say I'm not the only one who gets annoyed by it, because the few larger maps always seem to get voted on when they're an option. So I hope you like Skyline, Rewind, Scud, and Derelict, because those are pretty much the only ones you're going to be playing regularly, at least in the standard playlist. There are some other medium-sized maps, but they have a kind of weird flow to them, and they get played about as often as the small maps. So, like, for example, if you see Subsonic and Lowtown are your two options, it's kind of just a coin toss on which map you get. But yeah, the small maps I think are a problem. People already move really fast in this game. I'd say too fast even, which is largely because of Warzone, I think. You kind of need to move fast when you're on such a big map like Warzone, or else people are just going to get extremely bored and have problems going out in the open, so they're going to be hiding all the time. But it becomes an issue on small maps. And like I said, it wouldn't be as big of an issue if the maps weren't so small. You go back to like Modern Warfare 2019, you could move really fast in that game and it seemed fine because the maps were big. Of course, Modern Warfare 2019 had other issues, but I'm just saying, like, you could have bigger maps without it feeling massive and empty if properly planned. My next problem is detachment balancing. Several of them effectively don't do anything, like the barrel that increases headshot damage, but by so little that the only time you'd actually notice is when up against someone who is damaged and at a long range, which is kind of a rare occurrence. Like, I mean, not that it doesn't happen regularly, but it's just like, out of all the gunfights you're in, it's not exactly something that you should be preparing for. And that attachment depends on the gun, of course. I'm sure there are guns where it works really well on them. Increasing the time to kill by an entire shot, which is a decent improvement, but on some of them that's just not the case, so it's completely not worth it. Then there's just straight up bizarre attachments, like ones that increase accuracy only in the time period between hipfire and ADS, which I'm really not sure why you would ever pick that over another attachment, especially since it's a laser, which comes with the downside of having a visible laser, which, normally isn't much of an issue, but it can be. So it's just like, why would you ever take that attachment? And then there's some attachments that are just objectively worse than others. They do the same thing that other attachments do, but to a lesser extent. And if neither of them have downsides, then there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't just pick the stronger attachment. Also, with most guns, you can't effectively transform them into something else like you could in the rebooted Modern Warfare series, which is what I think makes Gunsmith so interesting, was the way that you could, basically turn, an SMG into an assault rifle or even an LMG at times. That was super interesting, but that's not how it works here in Black Ops 6, which is a little disappointing, but I do understand that it makes balancing hard, and so not having that makes balancing easier. The only problem is I'm not sure they really took advantage of that, because from what I've seen, the guns aren't any more balanced than other recent entries. You still have clearly stronger guns than others, and some that are clearly underpowered, and most of them are just middle of the road. I'm also really not a fan of the perk specializations or the perk balance in general. The perk specialization seems like a neat idea, but they're just way too strong. There's really no reason why you wouldn't create your class to have a perk specialization, because the perk specialization basically gives you 2 or 3 perks in one, on top of the other 3 perks you already have. Plus, typically, each perk category tends to work really well together, so you'd be using those together anyways. Which not only is that making everybody kind of overpowered, which creates some problems when it comes to you never really see streaks anymore. And I'm sure skill-based matchmaking plays a part, but I think the highest score streak I've seen so far, and I've played quite a bit, I think the highest score streak I've seen so far is the Watchdog Hilo. Like, I literally haven't even seen any of the higher score streaks. And it almost feels like they may as well not be in the game at this point. But like I was saying, the perk balance is pretty bad. A good chunk of the perks, I just don't understand why you'd ever use them. And then other ones are kind of just way too strong. And they'll be in like the same category as the ones that you'd never really use. So it's like why would you sacrifice something, as useful as Ghost for some useless perk? I really don't get it. And in terms of categories, I'd have to say the blue is by far the strongest, because not only does it have an extremely strong specialization perk, but it also has several of the strongest perks in general. But in good news, there are calling card challenges, which I was worried about the game not having them, since a few recent Call of Duty titles were basically missing any challenges other than camos. So that's good. There's also a decent amount of different stats you can see for the guns, which I think is really cool. And then the gunplay feels decent, which is probably the most important part at the end of the day. So overall, I would say that the multiplayer is better than Cold Wars, mainly just for that last part, that the gunplay feels better than Cold Wars. Like the combination of the movement and just the aiming, it all just feels slightly better. So, hopefully they rebalance some things and add some better maps.
Alpha team.
Okay, so I was really concerned about zombies at first. It's building on Cold War's formula, and I certainly wasn't the biggest fan of Cold War zombies, but it has been decent so far. I would absolutely prefer the more classic style, but I have been having fun with it. That said, it seems pretty shallow. I managed to figure out the main Easter egg on Liberty Falls on my own already. Without spoiling it, once you figure out the steps, it's really short. The steps are also largely things that had been done before, so if you've ever done any of the other Easter eggs, you should be able to figure this one out pretty easily. There's also the other zombies map, Terminus, which has this kind of interesting water mechanic. It's not like Zetsubo or whatever, where you're going underwater. You're kind of just going from location to location through water. And you can have a raft. I haven't played it nearly as much, so I can't really speak too much on it. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there could be some big problems with it. It might have an actual interesting Easter egg. I don't know yet. The main reason I've been playing zombies has been to get the first few attachments for guns, since they basically need attachments to be competitive in multiplayer, since the attachments don't have any downsides. I kind of talked about that in my video on the beta. That time period before you unlock attachments puts you at a severe disadvantage in multiplayer, whereas it's not a big of a deal in zombies, I feel like. But so overall, I think I can safely say it's the 6th best zombies experience. Or in other words, it's better than Cold War and any of the non-Treyarch zombie modes, but then obviously worse than all the other Treyarch zombie modes. It's decently fun, but it could be a lot better. So yeah, overall, Black Ops 6 isn't bad. It's pretty good even. I'm just left thinking it easily could have been, and really should have been, much better. But at the same time, we've also seen much worse, so I'm not particularly disappointed. But I do think it highlights that the problems that the series runs into are rarely because of a lack of time in the oven, since, this Call of Duty I think has had the most time behind it of any of the Call of Duties. And it's more often just poorly thought out ideas, like the perk specialization. And I think having multiple studios work on one project for increasing lengths of time is only exacerbating that problem, and we're seeing that problem go into other games, such as the Battlefield series. And I think it's an unfortunate trend with video games that we're going to continue to see, especially in the larger budget games. And yeah, I just think it's unfortunate. But yeah, could be worse. It's decent. This isn't like a full review, so I'm not going to give it like a 1 through 10 rating. So I'm just going to say decently good, could be better, could be worse. Let me know what you think of Black Ops 6 if you played it down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe. But that's it for today, so yeah, see ya.
I think it works decently well.